All right, so good afternoon. Let me shut the CNBC off. Good afternoon, everyone. Glad you can join me. We'll get going in just a minute. I am watching. If you're watching me hold Amazon stock, you're like, Jesus Christ. Yeah, travel stocks are through the roof. Like a bunch of friends I have are like, "Are you okay today? You're gonna, kill yourself when seeing this Amazon," and it's only down 10 or 11%. It's not that big a deal, but it's it's the opportunity cost. I usually stay in stocks for a short amount of time. In this case, I'm going to stay in it for 6 months or a year to get the money back. Amazon is it's actually probably a really good time to buy Amazon at this low, but NASDAQ is just, tech is giving it up. It will bounce back. It's Amazon. It's huge. It's part of everybody's life, but it's tough to sit through while other stocks go high, like cruise ships and things of that nature. So in any event, fun day in the market. But I hope everyone enjoyed a beautiful day outside, and we will have a podcast once again this week on the same topic we've been talking about most of the week. And it's an interesting one because as I try to talk more about state and national issues and kind of grow the audience overall, most other towns aren't dealing with this. Most towns have a plan to open relatively quickly in 2 to 3 weeks, and Branford is the outlier. So also, you might have seen California passed a law that there's like millions of dollars for school districts who reopen by the end of March. So they're significantly encouraging reopening soon. But last night's meeting was, just out of curiosity, 5 hours and 15 minutes long. So well done to those parents who stuck that out, and to the Board of Ed members and all the administration that was there and then had to get up this morning and go to work. There was a lot of work there. And it was an interesting meeting. I want to first start by saying I was impressed with John Prin's opening with an apology for the way he handled the previous meeting. There was still some, here's the thing about a special meeting. Yes, there are specific rules for that meeting, and the reason there's specific rules, and it prevents a board from calling a meeting quickly, having a special meeting, and then adding something to the agenda that could be impactful. A political party wants to change the rules of the meetings or rules of something in town. They call a special meeting. There's nothing on the agenda. They add a vote to the agenda, and they vote and change everything without notice to the public. That's the point of having very specific rules that prohibit that in a special meeting. And a special meeting only means that it wasn't scheduled at the beginning of the year. I think John's gotten a little too strict with this. I mean, realistically, if there's no vote taken, no one's going to care. You can have a conversation at a special meeting. You don't have to be only on one topic. If something comes up organically, no one's going to give a damn unless you take a significant action and a vote. In that case, it would be illegal. So at some point, just relax a little bit. Now, I give him a lot of credit. It's a hard thing to do, to get on camera and apologize publicly like that, especially in front of an audience that was not necessarily his fans. So that actually meant something. And that had a tendency to kind of disarm things a little bit. So that was wise. But just loosen up. It's just a conversation. And we talk about stakeholders, but everybody's a stakeholder in the same town. It doesn't have to be as combative as people are going into these as. That said, he presented his plan. I don't get it. I don't get the Board of Ed really not holding him accountable at all. And if you left that meeting last night saying to yourself, I think he's going to alter the plan or possibly make some changes, or I'm not sure, that's exactly how I left it, because there was nothing definitive in that meeting. And so, which is the exact opposite of what anybody wanted. How no Board of Ed member at some point didn't say, okay, thank you for that plan. I'd like to see an alternative. I'd like to see what a plan that opens before the end of March looks like. You can tell me the pros and cons, but by next Wednesday, can you present both? How that statement wasn't made, I don't know. I have no idea. And so I left that meeting like, what the hell? There's something weird that happens with Board of Ed members where they get in that room in front of Hamlet and those administrators or whatever it is, and they get soft, and it becomes like every declarative statement becomes well, do you think you can take a look at changing? Can you look at maybe changing the date on that? Do you think you can adjust this? Like, dude, just make a statement. Listen, I'd like to see a plan that opens before the end of March. What prevents you from presenting that? You can present your pros and cons. You can hate it, but present it to us. What does that plan look like? And we know that's not a hard plan to do because every other town has done it. Let's get to some specifics that we saw from last night that were, yes, April 19th is a day he wants to open. There's a whole lot of, caveat kind of language there. If the numbers do this, if the numbers don't do this. Here's the issue with the numbers. Now, Hamlet last night said we can't be looking at other towns. And for a second, I'm going to look at other towns. And Milford's a really good example. Milford looked at the numbers, but in their analysis, also looked at many other factors. The emotional well-being of the students, the ability of the teachers to teach, the logistical issues, the educational impacts on kids. So that while you have a push to say from the statistics numbers and a positive cases numbers, all right, let's open as late as possible. There's also a push from the emotional and educational well-being of the students to say, let's not open as late as possible and push back. But when Hamlet presented his plan, he only presented, his only criteria was how many positive cases. And I'm saying that in general terms. You had specific things, but it's all based on the number of positive cases. The problem with that is twofold. One, when this pandemic started, the decision was made that we're going to use that as the criteria, but everything has changed since then. So to stick to that after 5-6 months doesn't make any sense. Two is this, and we've all heard this from the beginning of the school year. Yes, our young kids weren't dying from this. Now, that's not a blanket statement. That's a social statement. So yes, there were some young children that passed away from COVID. In general, the deaths were not school-age children, especially younger school-age children. And so what was always told was, okay, hold on a second. They may not be dying, but we don't want them to pass this on, go home, get it to their aging parents or parents. The problem with the aging grandparents is vaccinated. So comparing the positive case numbers and the numbers from 6 months ago, then 3 months ago, then to now, you have a huge group of people that are vaccinated. So it doesn't really make sense to make a decision only based on the positive numbers. There have been drastic changes. Things are not the same as they were when we first were looking at those numbers or when we decided to use those numbers as an indicator. So fundamentally, my belief is using just positive cases as an indicator of when to open and when not to open doesn't make any sense. And so, one, we have other towns that have said, let's also compare that against the emotional needs, the educational needs. And two, there's been drastic changes to how those things are counted and the vaccines that are going out. The people who are most at risk have their vaccine now. So I question the validity of the plan itself. Not that it was well thought out, that they all got together and did this, and there's some logistical issues. The second part that threw me for, like, what the hell, is basically, as you look at the plan, the first 4 weeks are, the first week, one grade level opens on Wednesday. 2 weeks later, another grade level opens on Wednesday. And then the next week, another grade level opens on Wednesday. That's the first month of the plan? You're telling me we couldn't say, hey, next Wednesday we're all open, and that wouldn't work? You couldn't move this thing up 3 or 4 weeks like that? You took nothing basically happening the first month except opening on Wednesdays. Why can't the middle school and the high school also open on Wednesdays the same day? Was there a reason that can't happen? What is going on that we can only open one grade level at a time on Wednesday, and it takes another week to get to the next one? That doesn't make any sense. So there were fundamental questions presented that I was lost on in the presentation. That said, I think my bigger issue was with the members of the Board of Education, because they knew the elephant in the room was that every parent wanted to go back to school earlier. The surrounding evidence is that every other school is going back to school earlier. Like, we are the outlier. I could not find another school that needed, it was April 19th. It is March 4th. I'll pull up the calendar. The 8th, the 15th, the 8th, the 15th, the 22nd, the 29th, the 5th, the 12th, the 19th. 7 weeks. I have not found another school that has needed more than 4 weeks to reopen. And at no point, and the parents pushed for this, but at no point did any member of the Board of Ed say, I'd like to open by a date. What does it look like if we say, let's open by March 22nd or the 29th? We had some dancing around. We asked some questions, are you taking into account the emotional well-being? Are you taking into account social? But at no point did any member simply make a very simple statement. Why can't we be open by the 22nd? What does a plan to be open by the 22nd look like? Simply, we want to make a decision. Show us 2 plans. Give me the pros and cons. You'd be on the record with what you like or what you don't like. But there was no real answer, and he kept going back to the positive numbers. The positive numbers are completely out of context. Completely out of context. Because when we compared this every month, other positive numbers we get now, we didn't have vaccines then. The age groups most at risk are vaccinated. So fundamentally, for the Board of Ed, and I spoke to some members, and they seemed fired up, and they seemed, we're going to push for an opening in March. And by the way, you weren't pushing for anything crazy. Guilford's opening, the 15th? Other towns are opening the 22nd. There was, yes, you presented a plan to open on April 19th, but there was nothing presented on any reason why it couldn't be earlier. And that's what didn't make any sense. And that's what's missing. Now, somebody just posted the positive numbers are from hockey. Sports and school are very different conversations for me. I know there are parents who want sports back. The sports community wants to go to it is so weird that if North Branford has a home game at the Northford rink, parents can go in. But if Branford has a home game at the same rink, parents can't go in. I mean, that's odd. But I don't have nearly the level of sympathy for the sports parents that I do for those trying to get their kids back in school. I would rather focus on English and math and science than hockey. And I get it. It's important to those people, scholarships or colleges, or, you want to see your kid playing. The same way last year we had this huge nonsense about the graduation. We had to have graduation in person. I don't have a lot of sympathy for those. I get it. Understand it. Get the argument. But at the end of the day, that doesn't make any sense. And so the focus should always be on getting our kids back in school. I saw nothing in the plan that adjusted for the emotional and social and educational well-being of students. It was all on positive cases taken, in my opinion, out of context. And how did no Board of Ed members say anything? That's where I'm lost on. I don't get. When we ended the meeting, the parents spoke, some very passionately, most very composed. That was great. At the end of the day, I guess we left with next week, look at possibly, I don't know. Did anybody leave that meeting, and I'm asking you to comment, did you leave that meeting thinking, okay, we're going to get another plan next week? Or we're going to get, what it looks like sooner next week? I didn't leave that way. I watched it again, in part, especially of it, before I came live again. I didn't see anything that said next week. Now, I saw one person say, hey, next week we have some committee meetings. Could we present something there? But I saw nothing definitive. And if I'm a Board of Ed member, I want something definitive. From any of those members, I would have said, hey, guys, let's have a plan. This is time sensitive. The thought process is Hamlet wants to wait out the clock. Now, parents won to a certain extent. Hamlet was never going to reopen school this year. We know that. But then we get to, okay, we have April 19th. The date doesn't really make much sense. I didn't see any explanation as to why April 19th made sense. I didn't see any explanation as to why it couldn't be earlier. I saw nothing. And there were some members that said, are you taking into account things like the well-being of the students and the emotional well-being? And it was just some kind of generic blah, blah, blah. So I just want to comment, Cynthia, sports parents are also focused on education, scholarships matter, and we get these with grades and games. Listen, that's great. Let's get kids back in math. During the day, back in school. That's what we're focused on. What can happen for sports afterwards? And what we're seeing, and this is absolutely true, the highest spreads, sporting events. Sporting events and sports-related gatherings where the students on a team all seem to get together at one person's house. Not necessarily from classrooms. So yes, I understand the anger of the sports parents. I have far more sympathy and understanding for the parents that have had their kids home 3 days a week, trying to learn on a computer, especially younger kids. A 7-year-old trying to stay focused and learn on a computer with a parent who's trying to work while also working as a teacher for their kid. That's frustrating as hell. That experience, that learning experience, can't be good. If your best friend was in a different cohort, you're never seeing your best friends anymore. So at 7 or 8 or 9 or 10 years old, that has long-term emotional implications, long-term educational implications. And there have been articles that show that. So there was more than just positive data that Hamlet should have been going on. And the board never seemed to call him out on that. And I'm not saying it had to be combative. All the board had to do was say, listen, we want to see an alternative. That's it. Thank you so much for the work you did. I appreciate that you put that together quickly. We can argue whether he had a plan or not. But at the end of the day, not one member said, what's the alternative plan? What would prevent us from going to Guilford, going to Dr. Freeman, saying, I'd like to see your plan, and saying, hey, this is our plan too? What prevents that from happening? I just want an answer to that question. And it doesn't have to be combative. It doesn't have to be, I want answers. And no, listen, here we compare. Right? When we do the school calendar every year, we look at options. Well, we can have this holiday, or we can move this, we could end on this day. Every year we have the exact same conversation about a school calendar. And we present a couple different options for the school calendar. Every single year. And then they vote on them. But a reopening plan, they couldn't do that. Some of these comments, I'm so in awe of parents who both are working and trying to teach their children. I don't know if I could have done it. You were amazing parents. So part of having this podcast and having this discussion is I get to hear from a lot of parents. Some of those calls come at 10 o'clock at night. Some of those are just emails, and they're all fine. And I'll be glad to have those conversations with you. And so I heard from quite a few parents, one, that want school reopened, some really heartbreaking scenarios of their kids just not being able to concentrate. Listen, we built Walsh School because kids couldn't concentrate without classrooms, without walls in a classroom. Trying to leave them at home and study is far, far worse. I also heard from parents who did not want to reopen. So one thing that needs to be made clear is reopening full-time does not mean you have to send your child to school. You still have the option of taking your child home. Mm-hmm. And one of the questions that I do believe it was raised last night, or at least in comments as something was going on, was there didn't seem to be any indication on how many students would not be going back to school. There was no surveys done or nothing done in this whole time off to say, you know what, likely 30% of kids aren't coming back. It was clearly just put together in the last week. And I don't want to be critical of that, okay? We are where we are. This doesn't have to be Hamlet bashing. It just has to be a simple, if you're a normal human being and someone gives you a plan, it's normal for somebody to say, what are our alternatives? That's not accusatory. It's not combative. It's not angry. If somebody says to you, I want to sell you a Toyota Camry, you'll say, that's great, thank you. But what alternative and other options do we have? Are there other options that better meet our needs? I knew Hamlet wasn't going to present two plans, but how do we get to, 8, 9 board members who never said, What's the alternative? And we left this meeting after countless emails to those board members, countless calls to those. I mean, I know these groups are contacting them constantly with, we might talk about something next Wednesday. What are we talking about next Wednesday? At the end, one of the members said, so Hamlet, can you make sure you keep us in the loop for the next? What does that mean? We wouldn't do any of that in our jobs that way. We wouldn't handle anything that way. Hey, kids, do you think you may want to clean your room? Or like, what is that? No, we don't work that way. So the whole meeting, I'm saying to myself, somebody's going to say it. Somebody's going to say it. Somebody's going to say it. No one ever did. And we had that whole opening discussion with Board of Ed members. And I'm like, and then we get to parents. I'm like, how is this on parents at this point? There were so many letters that these board members got. And not one person said, what's the alternative? What other options do we have? Is there another option that better meets the emotional needs of our kids, the social needs of our kids, the educational needs of our kids? Especially when the first 4 weeks of this phase-in plan is opening on Wednesdays on one level of school. As if for some reason, Walsh and Sliney cannot both open on Wednesdays at the same time. Is there a reason for that? I just left the meeting. Yes, thank you, John, for your opening and your apology. You handled it better. Nope, not perfect, but better. Hamlet was composed and made his points. Clearly, he's only basing his decision, his plan, on the positive cases. It's the only thing he's basing it on. Not basing it on any other factors that so many other schools clearly said they were basing those decisions on. That seems crazy to me. And it seems crazy to me that not one board member said, what are alternatives? I'm going to read some of these comments. Exactly. Parents, students too afraid to return, let them stay remote. Those of us ready to return, let the kids come back. Yeah, you're not losing your ability to keep your child home. You, as a parent, you're responsible for that safety. So if at any point you want to keep your child home, and that goes for any time, keep your child home. It is true, and they said this a few times last night, that the school district represents more than just the parents that are there. And generally, this is kind of true in politics, the loudest people in the room get the squeaky wheel gets the oil kind of thing. And they can't just limit to that. There are parents that cannot go to those meetings or are not typically involved that have a say. But nothing that is being presented in this reopening plan would hurt them. They could stay home if they want to. And two, one thing Hamlet said is, well, we need to hear from those parents, and that's just delay tactics, more surveys. No, lead. At some point, just lead. Make a decision and open. Decision you made doesn't make much sense. Board of Ed, lead. Last night, the discussion was, Peter Burdun said that the LEAs, the local education authorities, are the people who are given the responsibility to do this. But I didn't hear any member actually act like they had that responsibility. I didn't hear any member last night say, we want to open in 3 weeks. What does that plan look like? I heard basically, thank you for your plan, Hamlet. And maybe if you think you may want to take a look at something on there at some point when you're bored and you're having a good day, and if you want to look at that then maybe next Wednesday you might tell us something about it. That's what I heard. And I don't think anybody else heard differently. I am still confused regarding the recurring statement that was made last night that the numbers were trending upward. The state positivity rate was below. So this is the lies, damn lies, and statistics. I don't mean this in a negative way, but you can get numbers to say anything. Maybe Branford's in a slight uptick, may not need much. Surrounding towns may be down. The state, whether the numbers are going up or down depends on how big the circle is. That's it. That's why I don't give much credence to the numbers now, because the people most at risk have been vaccinated. All we heard for 6 months was, kids really aren't the issue here. They're not getting sick. They're not having an issue, but they could be spreaders. They can go home and get their grandparents sick. We heard that constantly. Well, they can't go home and get their grandparents sick anymore. So even if they're positive and they're 8 and nothing happens to them in general, are we still going to use those same statistics? Does that make sense? The Branford BOE and this administration have failed our children. Very sad. I don't think the BOE has failed our children. I think this. I think this BOE is very new. I think most of this BOE has been on for less than a year or a year and a half. And I think it's true that when you walk in to a room, I don't care, whatever I'm called, press, journalist, blogger, blowhard, I don't care, whatever I'm called. When I walk in a room, I ask real questions. But most parents, that's not a skill set they have. So they want to get involved, but they defer to the professionals, the people with the doctorates and the masters and all that stuff in education. Remember something about the Board of Ed. You are there because of state statute. The founding fathers of this state decided that we need to have people from the community in that room for a reason. Do not shy away from asking real questions. I hate quoting from the Bible. What is it? The iron sharpens iron. You in there asking questions makes them do their job better. Don't shy away. They're not greater than you. They're not smarter than you. They're professionals in their field, but you're there because you were elected to be there to represent the parents and ask the questions that need to be asked. And you also hire the superintendent. So I don't care, at one point last night, John Prince said, you got to look at the regulations and certain things are certain responsibilities. That's fine. We hire you. I don't care what that is. We hire you. That's fine. Period. As such, you have a right to ask for options, ask for details, and ask for answers. Stop shying away. Stop asking questions as if you're afraid. Go in there with a point to be made and make the point. That parents do not have a solid plan to, at the very least, hear a detailed plan to reopen sooner is a failure of the Board of Education last night. Not one member said, what does a plan look like that opens earlier? And I would have liked specifics. And I keep pulling up my calendar. I would like to see a plan that opens on March 29th, next Wednesday. Can you show that to me with a list of pros and cons? That does not seem crazy because we do that every year with the calendar. We have those conversations all the time. We do that every year with the budget. Here's what happens if we have a 2% increase. Here's what happens if we have a 2.5% increase. Here's what happens if we have a 1.5%. We do this constantly. We look at options constantly, and no one last night can say, I want to know what a budget, what a reopening plan looks like by opening on the 22nd or the 29th. Show me options. And that's where the Board of Ed failed last night. I know they meant well. I know the members went in thinking they were going to fight for something. I don't know why they backed away. And I hope in some way at a committee meeting next week that on that agenda is Hamlet presents multiple options for reopening dates, including March 22nd and April 19th or March 29th and April 19th. That he prepares that. Now, if he comes in there and says, the walls of Sliney School will implode if we open 4 weeks earlier, and you have some evidence for that, okay. I don't think that exists. So I don't want to be, the BOEs are at the point, their job is to hold him accountable. They're part of the conversation too. They're not there to be yes men. It would have been perfectly fine for any member of the Board of Ed, completely acceptable, normal for that position to say, I want an alternative plan. Do you think for a second any member running for the Board of Education this November is going to run on, I'm just here to support Hamlet? I'm going to ask kind of half-assed questions to Hamlet a little bit, not really challenge him at all. That's what I'm here for. Please vote for me. Nobody's going to say that. They're all going to run on, we're here for accountability. We're going to make sure you're represented. They forgot that last night. I don't know why. It's not just them. It's happened on the Board of Ed for years. It didn't happen in Madison Board of Ed. I've never seen Madison. I've seen go at each other. Guilford, you had Bill Bloss, and he was an exceptional chair. So you had really one of the smartest guys I've ever seen run a meeting. So a little bit different. Branford has always been this kind of defer to Hamlet thing. And it's weird. And members get on there and say, I'm going to hold them accountable. And then if one does, they speak up and everyone else shies away. I don't know what that is. And that's not a knock on Hamlet. It's saying, why are we shying away from our job of iron sharpening iron? That's what's supposed to happen. By law, the people have a seat on the Board of Education. Demand options. Demand a plan. We didn't get that last night. I'm still confused regarding the recurring statement that was, oh, so I read that one already. I feel bad for the single dad who is usually in line ahead of me at pickup. He's really going to be up a creek without before and after care. Yeah, listen, there is no plan in the middle of a pandemic that's not going to be perfect. That's going to be perfect. There's going to be people that, schedules are tough. It's a pandemic. The question we ask is, how do we get the most students back to normal? Not every student. We can't account for every single student in every single situation, in every single working father or working mom. We can't account for that. It's not a reasonable request. But how do we get the most amount of kids back to normal as quickly as possible? And then there was some discussion about having class in the summer, but no specifics on that. That's kind of an odd thing to drop without some level of specifics. Leon, they are not running before and after care on Wednesdays. I'm probably not going to be able to send my son on Wednesday. You'll have to stay at the daycare. Guilford has had before and after care open every day. They've had students. Yeah, we just got to fight one battle at a time. I get it. That senior was Melissa Giuliano. Her testimony was devastating, speaks to everything this district is doing to harm our kids. So let's hold on a second. I am not of the opinion our district is harming and trying to harm our kids. You are facing, and just as a reminder, facing an unprecedented situation. Nobody is trained in how to get a school district through a pandemic. Nobody is. And if you remember, at the beginning of the school year and over the summer, Lamont was changing his mind every 30 seconds. There was different guidance here, and different guidance here, and different guidance here, and different guidance here. It was crazy. It changed constantly. And so I have some sympathy for Hamlin. He has to run this thing. My issue is the things that led your decision-making at the beginning of the school year or last summer have significantly changed. A positivity rate in September is significantly different than a positivity rate now because the people most at risk are vaccinated. So when you take the most at risk people and throw them out and say, wait, they're no longer an issue, that positivity rate doesn't matter. So we're using the same standard. And other schools have said, okay, we understand there's some changes. Let's also put in other factors as well. Clearly, everybody understands they need to get back to school. Clearly, everybody understands the emotional needs of students, the educational needs of students to be back, and the social needs of students to be back in school. So what harm is there in going back 4 weeks earlier now that we've made the decision to go back? But nobody asked the question. And that's the problem. The board should have been asking questions. Steve, the BOE is okay. Jeff Bryan, Hamlet intimidates the board and the teachers. People are scared of him and to speak up. I see that now. He'll be back for next school year. Here's the deal. Last night, those Board of Ed members had a room full of people and many people lined up to speak online. They had all the support in the world. Hamlet presented a plan. I didn't see anything he did last night that was intimidating. You may be intimidated by his presence, but I didn't see anything last night that was out of line. I didn't see him attack anybody. He maintained his calm. He had his plan and he went through it. There is no reason that you can't ask basic questions. And these are not accusatory questions. Listen, on the RTM, we get this crap all the time. Like Jamie says something and somebody asks some ridiculous question. Why are you corrupt? It's just nonsense. That's not what we're asking any of these Board of members to do. I strongly suggested that everybody not attack Hamlet. For the most part, nobody did. Some were upset. For the most part, that didn't happen. I'm asking the Board of Ed members to simply ask for the standard that we get in every other thing. Show us multiple options on a budget. Show us multiple options on new computers. Show us multiple options on a school calendar. A reopening plan? I don't need multiple options. What? You had all of these emails, all of these letters, all of these calls that said, we want to open earlier. We want our kids back in school in the next few weeks. And not one said, show me what a plan looks like if we open in 3 weeks by the end of March. That was a failure last night. So to the parents that have led this in grassroots for the most part, group, they've done their job. They've done it well. They got at least an opening date. It is now up to the Board of Ed to take it the next step. If we're not going to open by the end of March, there should be some bona fide reasons why our kids should continue suffering living at home, which everybody agrees is less than optimal. Why that has to happen for more weeks than we can have otherwise. Why do we have to go to the 19th when the 22nd would be much better for our kids? That's what I want an answer to. If you're a board member, I'm emailing John Prins and saying, please put on the agenda multiple presentations or multiple options on a reopening date, including reopening in March. That doesn't seem crazy to me because it happens in every other decision the board makes. The budget discussion goes back and forth on, is this a big enough increase? Is this not? Should we have this in there? Should we? And somehow with this, everybody shut up. No one said anything. So all I'm asking for the board to do, and I'm not speaking on behalf of those parents. I'm asking for elected members of the board, and if you were appointed to fill a position, you're still an elected member, to do what you promised to do when you were candidates, to do what you would promise to do in the future if you're a candidate, to ask tough questions, demand options, and to fully look at all different possibilities for these kids. Ask for a plan that opens in March. Let Hamlet tell you why or why not. Give a list of pros and cons. He can make his case. And at the end of the day, you guys sit there and say, you know what, we'd rather open in March. Or maybe you say you'd rather open in April, but then you own it. So it's not a yes or no on this plan. It's looking at 2 or 3 different options, just like every other decision is. When we built Walsh School, there were 3 or 4 different layouts that were presented to the public. Different, completely remodel, move it somewhere else, the tear down, the partial, all the stuff. There were multiple different options on building a school. We can have more than one option on going back to school. Demand the same thing. I hope, and we're not live tomorrow, but I hope by Monday we hear of an agenda that comes out, because that's when it comes out, maybe live during the podcast like it did this Monday, that has a presentation of a few different options on whatever that agenda is next Wednesday. But to those parents who did this work, congratulations. You were an example for what real activism to make something happen is. Like, for the most part, you fought off some of the political activism that sometimes is attracted to these things. And in speaking to many of those parents, they genuinely cared. And they really just had one goal. And they did a good job. And their presentations at last Wednesday and their presentation this Wednesday were very good. Jennifer Ann just asked me a question. Please just open, no more debates. Jen, just opening's not going to happen. Okay, right now the date is April 19th. Unless the board looks for options and reasons to support or reasons against those options, you're not going to get anything. So somebody has to take some action. It's nice to say just open. That's just not reality. And it is what it is. You know, we can yell about what should happen, but there's also political realities and the way these things actually work. We have to work within those constructs. That's why, you know, my advice, there were teachers saying we have to go to after Hamlet and present this false information. He lied about this and went after. Okay, but it won't work. There's a right way to go about this if you want the results you want. If you want to get in a pissing match and a shouting match, that's one thing. If you actually want results. So here's what you did. You went from having no reopening date to an actual reopening date, right? You have that now. Now you're going to rely a little bit on your Board of Ed members. I would have thought they would have had a little bit more last night. They didn't. Let's hope now, behind the scenes, they're pushing to get on that agenda some act. I know you do. I know you guys understand this. Now you have to take these baby steps. There is time sensitivity. Next Wednesday is the 10th. I have a hard time believing that if a plan was presented on the 10th to reopen on even the 22nd, but the latest the 29th, that could not be implemented based on what has happened in every other school district. Let's hope our school, our Board of Ed members see that and push to see, at least allow Hamlet to present what that plan would look like and the pros and cons of that plan. That being said, we had a lot of new watchers this week, and I thank you for joining me. I hope it's beneficial to you. I hope you learned something. If there's feedback, if there's criticisms, you're welcome to send those to me, and I respond to many of them if they're sincere and legitimate, and I'd like to hear from what you have to say. Thank you for all the emails this week and the new watchers, and any topics you want us to discuss next week. I'd be glad to do that. Obviously, we'll be talking quite a bit about this again as we get to next Wednesday. I hope you all have a phenomenal weekend. And on that note,